So another project off the pile is this shelf here in a laundry area, giving me a nice little smiley face. It has sagged over the years. This shelf is about 40 years old. It's 1 by pine and a skosh over 6 feet long, 2 meters for those of you in the rest of the world. And obviously the pulls of gravity and the weight that's been on this shelf over the decades has caused it to sag. The shelf was constructed from a few boards, and they have a cleat on it running this way, which will tie the boards together. That's nice, but if they had just put a cleat on the front to form a bit of an L shape, it would have added a lot of strength to the front. Probably would have sagged anyway, but not nearly to this extent. And another unfortunate part of this shelf is there's a knot right here, which is almost dead set front and center, which is making the part of the shelf that needs to be the strongest just a little bit weaker. I took the time to price out what it would take to buy this much clear wood, and it was going to be about $100, and that seemed a little excessive because after I buy the wood you still have to build this massive shelf, so we'll have to see where we lead with this. So you can see by the staining and lack thereof, it looks like this thing was stained after it was mounted in place. And my goal is to paint it white, and with this really dark wood, I hedge my bets by using this sander deglosser. It doesn't look like there's a finish on the wood, it looks like it's just stained, but just in case, I'll wipe it with the deglosser to rough up whatever finish may or may not be there. And the deglosser will also help take away some of the dust, so it gives it a kind of a water bath type of cleaning. And this stuff, if you've never used it, I'm not sure what's in it, but it kind of smells like soapy water. And this is the primer choice. I find it does an excellent job of covering the dark stain. I've had the unpleasant experience of the dark stain bleeding through other stain blocking primers, and this stuff seems to do a good job of making sure that never happens. It's oil based and it's not a very pleasant smell, so I always use disposable chip brushes to do it. Doesn't flow that well, so I find you have heavy brush marks, so I typically end up doing 2 coats and then 2 coats of the top coat. So here it is, a work in progress. The shelf is upside down and I have clamped on this board. I salvaged this from a futon years ago. I don't know what kind of wood it is. It's a white blonde wood, kind of reminds me of something like beech. And the dimensions are nice. It seems to be a little over 1 inch thick and well over maybe 2.5 inches tall, and I'm thinking of gluing it to the front face, and then I'll be able to drive some screws through it. My other levels on the job site, if I put this level on it, it's not quite straight, but it's pretty close. There's a little bit of a gap here and down the other end, but boy, you're talking maybe a millimeter. So it looks as though this board has enough strength anyway to hold the shelf unit flat. And finally, these cleats on the bottom, I don't know what they're called, I guess they're called battens or something. It looks as though they're just screwed in place, and there's a pretty noticeable gap between the boards. Well, it disassembled easy enough. Here are the screws, and it came apart easy except for this screw here. It went into a knot, and the knot didn't want to give it up, so that one broke. Well, one slight complication, the cleat that supports the shelf extends out beyond the shelf. So this front nosing piece is going to hang down parallel to the cleat. And in order to be able to tip it in, I'm going to angle it back a little bit. So I need to cut a notch out of each end. And there's the first side cut off. I'm going to try to remove a little bit of the finish from this edge up here where it's going to be glued, and I'm going to use a number 78 and hopefully just take away a little bit of the finish and keep it flat, or maybe even flatten it a skosh if it's not. Well, here's the final shaving. It was a pretty heavy cut and it came out pretty well. So I think that was easier than setting up a cut in a table saw, and certainly a lot smoother. Took the time to plan out for 7 screws, and now I'm just marking. So I cleaned up this edge, and the front edge here using my table saw and number 7 hand plane. And this joint here is pretty gosh darn straight. I think that'll glue up very nicely. I plan to glue these two together, and I decided to flip this board over so that the smile is now a frown, and as time goes on the springiness of the board will fight gravity. Of course I'm going to put the front nosing on it that'll hold it straight anyway, but I figured it would be wise to take advantage of the natural spring in the board. And gluing them together this way also has the advantage that the rings here, I don't know if they're showing up, but they're a frown. And over here, this is a smile. And again, that would tend to keep these two boards together a teeny bit flatter than they might otherwise. I also discovered that this board is tapered in the back corner to undoubtedly fit in the enclosed wall. You know, I got two inside corners there. And one final note, they were nailed in the four corners, and as the wood contracted, I think that caused the center seam to pull apart a little bit as the extreme corners couldn't move. I'm not planning on using fasteners to put it in, and I've cut slots for 7 biscuits. I also took the time to drill and countersink the holes in the front cleat, and I have various clamps set up to try to get clamping pressure everywhere I think I need it. I have a couple cauls that I'll use in the middle, and my challenge now is, can I get it all assembled before the glue sets up? So we'll see how that goes. Well, the biscuits seem to do a perfect job, so all these clamps I had set up to align these two faces, look like I don't need them. So these two boards are glued and drying, and they look pretty good. The joint is not perfect. There's a fraction of a millimeter that you can feel in some spots, and this is not fine furniture. I just want to make sure if somebody puts something on the shelf as they slide it to and fro, it just won't hook on this lip. I could sand it, but I think that will kick up a dust storm. I could scrape it, and I think my hands are going to start to cramp up. But I do have this Stanley number 80 cabinet scraper, which is made just for such a task. Those of you not familiar with it, there's a bevel 45 degrees running this way and 45 degrees this way. I don't know how well that's showing up. And after you grind the bevel, you put a hook on it to hook over. So there's a hook going this way and a hook going this way. Then you gently set it in, let it touch the piece, secure it down with these two thumb screws on either side, and the thumb screw, when you tighten it, pushes on the center of the iron, causing it to bow or spring a little bit, and that actually pushes the bottom of the iron a little deeper to give you a deeper cut. So that's effectively the depth adjustment, and for a job like this, this is pretty much the perfect tool. Goes a lot faster than sanding, not nearly as dusty, and it gives you great results. It was a little coarse, but then I could easily clean it up with a common card scraper. Well, it only took a few minutes with the cabinet scraper and card scraper, and it's looking and feeling pretty good. So this cabinet scraper behaves a lot like a spoke shave or even a hand plane, especially when you have wood that's cooperating. I had such good luck with biscuits on this seam, I decided to add biscuits for this front bar, and that will help me align this. The biscuits in this particular joint are actually adding quite a bit of strength. The forces you're trying to fight is this front nosing shearing from the horizontal shelf, and in that direction the biscuits are adding a lot of strength because you'd have to literally shear the biscuit. This knot popped out on me. I'm going to take a minute to glue it in place. It shrunk and cracked, which is part of the reason why it broke. So I'm going to try to mix a little bit of a paste into it. And I have a deep reach clamp. Well, here's the shelf ready for primer. You can see there are giant knots in it, not to mention medium and small knots. They're just all over the place. I also rubbed it down with the deglosser for good measure. And here is the shelf with a coat and a half or 2 coats of primer and a coat of top coat paint. And it's looking pretty good. This shelf is really never going to be seen. It sits too high. And I have a feeling once it's reinstalled, it will probably never be uninstalled until somebody's once again ready to make some major changes to the laundry closet. So here's the underside, and I ran out of my preferred stain blocking primer. I think I'm going to try an older technique. People used to paint shellac over areas like knots to seal them in so that you could paint over them. And the underside with some white paint on it. It looks as though the shellac trick has worked pretty well. I don't see any bleeding coming through, as of yet anyway. And the finish certainly looks good enough for the underside of a shelf that'll never be seen. I also painted the end grain. And here it is installed. Can't tell you, it was kind of tricky to get this shelf into the laundry closet. It just barely fits. We had to twist and pull it in various directions just to get it to set in right. And it's looking good. As you can see, it's very straight. Took the sag out, and the way it's constructed, I think it's significantly stronger in terms of sagging. Well, that's all I got for this guy. Hope you picked up a trick or two from watching it. Happy you stopped by. And as always, stay safe, take care, and we'll catch up with you on the next one.